Good morning, folks.
Good morning.
Karina.
Just realized it looks like I'm wearing pajamas, but really this is a Christmas cat sweater. So
Oh, nice. Oh, you look great.
Happy holidays.
yes, happy holidays.
Hey, Richard, thank you for joining us.
Good morning, everyone.
Usually takes a
Good
couple minutes for
Thanks for having me.
Hi, thanks
but
for
yeah.
joining. Where are you located, Richard?
I'm in the Tampa Bay area in Florida. My accent doesn't sound like it, but I've lived in Florida for probably 20 years now, but I grew up in Brisbane, Australia, so I'm a long way from home.
You see, you're really working on your Florida accent.
I'm trying. It's not going well, but I'm working on it. It's nice here at this time of year.
I have family there.
Oh yeah?
I like going there for the holidays.
Yeah.
Down St. Pete.
Yeah, it's beautiful at this time of year. In St. Pete?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's just a short trip down the road. I love St. Pete. Beautiful area.
Yeah.
Karina, could you show a
Ironically, I'm
little
not a
bit
big
more
fan
of
of
your
the beach.
sweater? Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's
Oh my
worth
God,
it.
that's hilarious. I love it. Okay, now I killed the conversation. I'm sorry. Just wanted to see more of the sweater.
Everybody stopped talking when I appeared, so I seems like I killed the conversation.
Hello,
Hi.
Alois.
Hello.
I feel like I
So
should go and put on a Christmas sweater too now.
do it.
Okay.
Is the season.
I mean, when else are you going to wear them? July?
Exactly.
Maybe.
I'm precisely. I mean, right now it's too warm for me to even wear a sweater, so maybe this evening.
It'll still be 70 out.
Yeah, at the moment, not far off it. Yeah, it's in the 60s.
So we changed up the hosting a bit for the tag. So I don't know if you wanted to talk about that, Josh or Leon. Wait, now we have to see your sweater. Oh, yes, that's amazing. I love it.
Invincible stars.
Nice.
Yeah, I guess Karina, if you want me to just state that we're gonna rotate leadership of this meeting. So I guess the TLs and the chairs on here, please, we have the running spreadsheet where you can mark yourself to sign up, or just even in the notes for the meetings and the agenda pages, you could put yourself in. I'm super happy about that. So I'm looking forward to Karina running it today.
Apologies in advance. I know Josh always does an amazing job running the meetings. Okay. We'll pause for a minute while everybody else gets their Christmas sweaters on. Okay. Then we can go ahead and kick off. Josh, thank you for taking notes today. And as always, we, follow the CNCF guidelines for, everybody be nice, talk nice, etc. And if you don't want to be on the recording, turn off your video. Otherwise, we go ahead and put your name into the docs file, showing that you've attended, that you were here. And we have a number of agenda items. And then after we go through our agenda, we have Richard here from Threeport to give us a presentation. So thank you for being here. Excited to see that. All right. So
My
first
pleasure.
off, I'm actually going to, if you can introduce yourself, we'll just go through any new members, any new people to the call. Please go ahead and quickly introduce yourself.
I can be the first if you like. So my name's Richard Lander. I'm the CTO at a company called Cleat, and we're building an open source project called Threeport that we're going to talk about today. And I'm located in the Tampa Bay area in Florida, which has wonderful weather at this time of year, but not in July.
Good to have.
Thank you. Bundy? Did I say that right?
Yeah, yeah. Hey folks, how are you? So this is the first meeting that I joined recently. I get to know about this that SIG special group of interest. Okay, people have like special interest on that part, and they are like meeting together and discussing about that thing. So recently, couple of weeks back, I get to know about this thing. So about myself, I am Vandit Pandey from India. I am CSE like last year of like fourth year of student. Apart from that, I am actively contributing in a community. I am the organizer of Cloud Native Vadodara. That's the CNCF local chapter I'm running. Apart from that, for around 6 to 8 months, I manage the Docker community as well. And currently as a beta MLSI and as a developer lead for the local region. So in a word line, I can say that like I advocacy around the cloud and cloud native. So that's the pretty much about myself. Currently, I'm looking the role as a cloud engineer or DevOps intern. So yeah, that's pretty much about myself. Yeah, thank you so much for like inviting or hosting this meeting kind of thing and get to know. Okay, this is the people they are interested to do this kind of stuff. So yeah, kudos to all the team. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for being here. Would anyone else like to introduce themselves?
Hi, this is Shane. I work at VMware by WorkCon now. So I'm a co-chair of tag storage. So I got pinned by Josh and Karina for this meeting because there's a presentation by Apiculture Registry for their sandbox application. So did I get the date right? Is that today that they are going to present?
We forgot to update you. So we moved theirs to January 17. And I am so
okay.
sorry that we forgot to do that. And thank you
That's
for
okay.
being here. You're welcome to stay, or we'll update you on the new date and time. I apologize for that oversight.
Oh, no problem. I will, since I'm here, I will stay so and see how you guys run the meeting.
Well, thank you for being here. And I apologize for interrupting your intro as we realized. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. All right. Would anybody else like to introduce themselves? Okay. So something that we've also been talking about is, and thank you again for being here, is so that projects don't have to go present to multiple tags, inviting tag chairs and tech leads into the meetings and vice versa, so that we can get more insight into the talks, into the presentations. Anyway, okay, so moving on. We have some tag updates. We have the blog post. Is Abby here? Was this Abby's blog post?
It's actually a blog post from Victor Nagy from GitLab, and I just wanted to call people's attention to it. We're reviewing it. Abby has been the force behind encouraging some new, blog posts from the community. So we think that, we're not going to comment too deeply on the opinion itself, but we think that it's about ready to be published in that way. So if you have thoughts on that, check it out.
Awesome.
It also means that we're establishing some policies around this, like what's the standard disclaimer that it gets attached to all of these. And so that's an open PR at the moment. So if anyone is interested in that, please check it out.
Thank you. I put that into the notes. Josh, do you want to run with the notes?
Oh, right,
Okay.
sorry. Yeah, sorry, Karina, thank you for reminding me. Yeah, and in fact, there might be, Marsh, is there already an issue open for that? I'll put it in here. You know, Abby was tracking that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can track that down if you want, Josh, and add it.
I think that'd be
Yeah,
helpful.
okay, yeah, if you see something, I'm not sure if I see it.
I think I have it open in a tab. I'll find it and add it. Check. Thanks.
Okay, this is awesome. The initial end user interview was carried out, in work group platforms. Josh, would you like to give an update on that?
Yeah, we held the first interview yesterday. There were about 3 or 4 interviewers and one person got interviewed. We took the notes, we recorded it. It was, to me, it yielded the insights we were looking for, so I think we're on the right track. And we're going to try to do another one tomorrow. So yeah, if you want to participate in that, just come to Ouija platforms. We'll be talking about that in the next meeting and stuff.
Okay, can you put the Slack channel into the notes as well? And how people can find that meeting? That'd be awesome. So I will probably join that one too. So next on the agenda, trying to get through to make sure we have time
Hey,
for 3
can I ask you a question? I hear that you're talking about this end user interview. How do you identify people to interview with? I'm just wondering, or maybe I should just read your document and see.
No, that's actually, we've decided that we'll go with our colleagues and people we know to begin with. Just we're looking for platform engineers. You know, it's MVP, and this is an interesting place to try to do a set of user interviews via CNCF. So right now, we're just interviewing people that are part of the group, actually.
Okay. Thank you.
Let me get back to our agenda. There's now website support for Chinese, Korean, and Japanese is in progress. That's really good to know. Leon, do you want to give an update on that?
I don't think I've been as involved as Josh has been, so I don't know, but just, there were some pull requests. It looks really good. My Chinese is not actually good enough to also understand everything, because they've also translated the platform white paper, which is very amazing. But yeah, everything's looking good. There are other native speakers who have reviewed it and seems to be going great. Yeah, super happy about that. I'm wondering if we should try to encourage that more, or just wait for it to happen. I'm feeling like maybe the momentum will just take, because I think there was one person starting with the Chinese translation, and then the other translation, I didn't even know they existed. So maybe we'll just let it roll, and then people will just do it, hopefully.
That's what we've done till now. Folks are just motivated and come in and do it. So it's been pretty cool.
That's really good to see. Okay, we have, I'm assuming, Josh, you put this one into?
That's actually from Abby. Abby actually did those. So she created this new page with the Tech Maharaj's help, Atul. I just know him as the Tech Maharaj. So that page is in, and she's working on another pull request to augment it. And I guess she wants people to take a look.
That's great. One of the top questions that we got at KubeCon and in other areas is how do you contribute to the tag? So definitely go read that. I know Abby did put a lot of work into that. Okay, and then a PSA that our January 3rd meeting has been moved to January 10th to make sure we have another meeting for projects to come present. Quickly on KubeCon Paris. Now, Josh, and Jan, do you have more updates on KubeCon Paris? I know there's the maintainer talk. Maybe we could talk about that really quickly first and then go through
Sure.
the other.
We have worked on an abstract on behalf of the tag for the maintainer track specifically, which is about all the projects and initiatives and working groups we have been, well, not all of them, but some highlights that we've been discussing in the past, maybe year, maybe half a year, depends on how much it is. And the idea is to showcase how there's so many topics that all fall under app delivery or find their way to our tag that doesn't seem like it's app delivery on the first glance, basically. So the idea is kind of like showing like how app delivery is eating the world and how everything, every decision you make, every project kind of like feeds into this idea of how do we deliver apps cloud natively to production. That's the idea. It's a bit like meme-ish. So I don't know if you know about the iceberg meme. The idea is basically there's some stuff on the top of the iceberg that you can see, and there's much more underneath the water that you can't. So that's kind of the image that I'm trying to use. I'm literally right now trying to whittle down my bio to 500 characters so I can submit the talk. But yeah, so Thomas and I, we will be submitting that together, and we are also the people who are responsible for setting up whatever we want to do at KubeCon Paris in terms of project meeting, which I've just read that won't happen, apparently. We won't have project meetings, but we'll have maybe like a BOF kind of table situation. This is the information. Maybe someone else has more information on that specifically, but if anyone has any questions about the talk, yeah, feel free to ask. And also the working groups can submit talks individually, separate from us as well. If you have any cool ideas about what you want to share, maybe about the working group that you're active with at the moment, feel free.
Thank you for driving that. It'd be great to see one of the working groups submit a talk.
I've been working
Yes.
with the artifacts crew a tiny bit, so maybe if I'm motivated in the next couple of days, I'll help them get it over the line.
Is there anyone in the platform as a product working group in here, like who's active in that group? In this meeting?
Hey, this is Dave.
Hi.
I am a relatively new member, but I've been pretty active in it in the last month, 6 weeks.
Nice. Is there a meeting that you still have before end of this year? Probably not. Just realized it's Christmas basically on Sunday already.
Yeah, our next one will be January something.
But I feel like the that group is starting to be quite active, and then obviously like if we have a chance to maybe showcase the maturity model, that would be amazing as well. So maybe we just like post a message in Slack like, hey, I think you did that already, but I don't know if you did it in the individual working group channels as well, Josh.
Yeah. I have to think about it. If somebody wants to, like, I'm a little bit nervous to just post it straight up in the channel. But if somebody listening or on this call here wants to work on a talk around it, like, yeah, ping me, basically.
Are these talks for Paris?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
the maintainer
I
track
submitted-
is.
Sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, the maintainer track's CFP is after the official like the official CFP has ended. So it's still open until 31st, I think. And I'm not quite sure what the rules are. Can you only submit 2 talks in total or 2 each? No idea. I don't know if anyone here knows.
All right. Don't know, but maybe Josh, I'll get together with who's our illustrious leader in the working group, platform as product. I'm sorry. I'm Michael. Thank you. And see if it was. I know he's intending to go, and I'm planning to go. So I'll see if he would like to submit a talk on it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
And then
Let's
just
chat about it.
regarding the what we're doing in Paris as a group. So I'm just reading the email that you that Tin sent like 2 weeks ago. So basically, I guess we still have to wait until next year for them to tell us what exactly the setup can be. Yeah.
That's what I think.
Okay.
Too. I think we'll hear more.
All right. I
And
think that's
I believe this time, so we had the tag tables in Chicago, and I think that'll be more hopefully official for Paris. So
yeah. And then I think we also discussed if we're doing booth sharing again. So far, it's always been like we had a half-day booth that we would ask the GitOps working group because they wanted their own booth too. Maybe we can share the same booth. That would be amazing if we could do that. But yeah, we'll just have to like wait for them to let us know what the situation will be.
that's a good idea. Okay. All right, moving on. Really quickly is we had to close out on annual reviews. So Colin, are you close to, can you give an update on Steeler really fast?
Yeah, I'm gonna pick that up about tomorrow afternoon. I expect to knock that out before Friday. I went through the work before and then just kind of sunsetted it when we took the issue away later, but I just have to surface some of that kind of stuff and roll back through it. So
Awesome.
I'll chat with you on Slack if I need some clarification.
Cool, thank you. And I submitted CD Kates, and Justin and Katie are going to go do a further review on that one. So the recommendation is that so for projects that are looking to submit to the CNCF, there are some projects that have stopped community meetings, or we all had a tough time during the pandemic, haven't gained maintainers, the project doesn't look as healthy, and it still seems more like a vendor-led product or project. So just keeping in mind then, project health and maintenance and, kind of ongoing, project support. And if you have questions on that, reach out to the rest of the tag too. Okay. That leaves us time for you, Richard. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to bring up before we go to Threeport's presentation? Okay. Great. I'm going to hand it over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Karina. And thanks for having me. I'm really excited to tell everyone about Threeport, and I'll share my screen here. I have some slides that I can share with some talking points on it. So hello, everyone. Again, my name's Richard. I'm the CTO at a company called Cleat. I probably should have included this at my intro at the beginning of the call, but I've been building Kubernetes application platforms since about 2015. Put my first in production in 2016. I worked as a field engineer at CoreOS and Heptio and VMware. So I've spent a lot of time helping enterprises build application platforms using Kubernetes, and co-authored a book, an O'Reilly book called Production Kubernetes, which I'm really, really biased, but I think it's a good book. I think you should check it out. You can download it for free from VMware still, I believe. So I would recommend doing that. At any rate, so Threeport is based on like the collective experience of the maintainers of the project. And let me just make this a little larger so everyone can see. So starting off with value to end users. So at KubeCon in Chicago recently, Tim Hocken gave a keynote that talked largely about complexity budgets in using and managing Kubernetes, which really, really resonated with me. And one of the quotes he shared in that presentation is at the bottom of this slide here from Janet about, to paraphrase, it's about like the overwhelming how overwhelming choice creates complexity and barriers to progress, you might say. And so today we see a lot of projects being born on platforms like Google Cloud Run and Heroku or Vercel, simply because they make getting up and running really simple, right? And however, the problem becomes that as a software project or a product grows, it sooner or later outgrows those platforms, right? And these teams often face a replatforming effort onto Kubernetes in order to gain the capabilities with that system. It's just something I've seen a lot. So in a nutshell, Threeport exists to make Kubernetes as easy to use as Cloud Run, while retaining the opportunity for a project to incrementally expand in sophistication and capabilities over time. All right, and then the other part of the value to the end users is essentially this. So Threeport intends to cover like 80 to 90% of common deployment patterns. And if we provide an easy to launch solution for the majority of use cases, that's great. If we allow small teams to grow in their early stages without having to hire a dedicated DevOps or platform engineering team, that's a win. However, the reality remains that the unique requirements and custom solutions that come along with the growth of a project, they need to be solved for, right? And Threeport provides an extensible platform that platform engineers can use to implement custom abstractions for their developers as their project grows. So the soon to be released Threeport SDK is the primary platform engineers tool to deliver this. And you can think of our SDK as a little bit like Kube Builder, if you're familiar with Kube Builder, but for Threeport and Kubernetes. And we actually leverage a Kube Builder plugin as a part of our development. And this allows platform engineers to provide those custom abstractions to their developers so that they can seamlessly deliver their software with all of its dependencies coherently. And Threeport is natively agnostic to the cloud provider or the geographical location where software is being delivered. And so those capabilities are natively supported. And so there's also another quote from Tim's keynote at the bottom right on this slide about the need for a Rails equivalent for Kubernetes, right? And that's a void we're filling with Threeport. All right, so on technical architecture, so the green box at the top of this diagram represents the Threeport control plane, and it manages all the concerns that you see below it in the diagram. It orchestrates the app deployment, which in this case is the orange box, the tenant workload. So it delivers the tenant workload. However, it also is designed to manage and orchestrate the cloud infrastructure that's needed by the workload, the Kubernetes clusters, and possibly other runtimes that we could support in the future in addition to Kubernetes. It also orchestrates the managed services that are run by third-party providers and the support services that are installed on the cluster. So the idea is that the user can interface with the Threeport API via a command line tool normally, and then on the user's behalf, Threeport interfaces with the cloud provider API and the Kubernetes cluster APIs. And so this diagram illustrates some more detail about how the Threeport control plane is architected, right? So we've borrowed a lot of engineering principles from Kubernetes itself around state reconciliation using level trigger controllers, but we've made some decisions that speak to why we didn't implement this as an extension to the Kubernetes control plane using Kubernetes controllers. So the first important thing is that we use Cockroach DB as the persistent storage layer instead of etcd. Because Threeport effectively exists as a global control plane managing all of your clusters and workloads, it's distinctly different from Kubernetes, which is a data center or regional control plane, you might say. So we chose Cockroach DB for its ability to span geography and be resilient to regional failures in the cloud. Additionally, another important thing to point out is that we implemented NATS Jetstream, which is in the middle of that diagram there. And that's there to enable horizontally scalable controllers. So whereas in Kubernetes, the controllers use a watch mechanism to connect to the API and receive notifications about changes to state that they need to reconcile, we use NATS to manage the delivery of notifications so that load for reconciliation is spread across multiple replicas simultaneously. And we also use NATs as like a distributed lock mechanism so that any specific object is only undergoing a single reconciliation process at any given time. And that's different from Kubernetes, where even in a highly available configuration, you generally have the one that's active, one controller that's active, and others are on standby if the active one goes down. And this scalability is super important, and it's something I learned as a field engineer. In use cases where a team is managing, say, tens of thousands of Kubernetes clusters, like in a large-scale retail or telco use case. And so we've got like really resilient scalability built in. So being a little bit more specific, there's a couple of controllers that are externally facing. You can see the AWS controller. Oh, and one thing I didn't mention is that today the only cloud provider that we support is AWS, but support for other cloud providers is a matter of adding a controller for that cloud provider. So we have an AWS controller and a workload controller that are responsible for interfacing with the AWS API and the Kubernetes APIs, respectively. And there are other controllers that are internally facing, managing internal configuration reconciliation. And an example of that is the gateway controller at the bottom left, so that if a user defines a gateway dependency for their workload, saying which is to say they want it exposed to the public internet, the gateway controller informs the workload controller through the API to deploy those support services onto the cluster, like the ingress layer and cert manager and external DNS to manage those gateway concerns. And you'll see an example of this. I'll give it a demo shortly. And the Kubernetes runtime controller is effectively an abstraction so that a user can say, hey, I want a Kubernetes cluster as a new runtime in a new region to support my workloads. And as a field in that object, they can specify, say, EKS, and it will create the object in the API that the AWS controller responds to, talks to AWS to spin up that EKS cluster. Josh, I see you've got a raised hand there. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I just was wondering if, so like you kind of have like Kubernetes on Kubernetes, or like a Kubernetes-like on Kubernetes. I was wondering if the APIs, like that gateway controller that you mentioned, do you intend to just project the same APIs that are in Kubernetes, or is it going to be a different API?
It's a different API, yeah. So Threeport has its own distinct API that has a set of abstractions that are at a higher level to the Kubernetes API. And hopefully that'll be a little clearer when I give you a demo, and I can show you the different objects that we have in our API.
Okay, cool.
All right, and for example, a Kubernetes runtime instance is an object in our API. And it's there to manage Kubernetes clusters, and the Kubernetes runtime controller also manages the connection details to those Kubernetes APIs that the workload controller manages. And the workload controller is responsible again for spinning up those containerized workloads, be it the tenant workload or support services. So with that said, let's jump over to a demo. And the first thing I'll share here is my terminal. Okay, so I just want to first share, I'm going to get this out of my way, what I did to set up this demo environment. And it was just a single step. And if I scroll up a little bit here, tpt-cuddle is the command line tool that we release with Threeport, and it's available for download at GitHub. And this command line tool allows you to issue the up command, which installs a Threeport control plane. And today we support two environments. You can install it using Kind on your local workstation, or in this case, I identified the provider, EKS, so that we can install the Threeport control plane in AWS. And I just gave it an arbitrary name. I called it demo. And because we're going to EKS, I specified the region that I want to deploy it into. And then you can see from the tpt-cuddle command output here, that we've reached out to AWS using my local AWS configuration and credentials. We've installed all of the networking and the IAM resources and the EKS cluster. And the final step that we perform is to install the Threeport control plane. Well, second to last step. We install Threeport on that cluster, and then we update my local Threeport config so that I can use tpt-cuddle to securely connect to that Threeport API and manage Kubernetes clusters and workloads. And to illustrate what that looks like, This is all of the pods that are running in that remote EKS cluster, and you can see all the usual suspects in the cube system. And we have our Threeport control plane namespace, which contains our Threeport control plane components. And as an aside, we have a support services operator that we built largely just for Threeport, and we use that to offload some of the granular concerns for managing those support services. So we have custom resources for the components like the glue edge gateway and cert manager and things like that, which takes some of the complexity out of the Threeport control plane and offloads that into a Kubernetes operator. All right, so the other thing I'll point out real quick, let me just check my notes here. Yeah, okay,
What
cool.
all is in
So
the,
if
I'm
I
just
jump
curious,
over,
in that support services operator, would you mind just saying which services does it deploy? Glue
so
Edge
today
Gateway?
it manages the glue edge gateway, cert manager, and external DNS.
Got it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And essentially what that means is that the Threeport control plane can specify just a single custom resource that will inform the support services operator to install those support services according to certain configs. Yeah, you bet.
Like your agent.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mention an agent, because we actually also have a Threeport agent that runs in every Kubernetes runtime. We install that so as to report back high-level statuses to the Threeport API for user visibility. So over here in AWS, we have our Threeport demo. This is the EKS cluster that was spun up to install the Threeport control plane, and we just saw the pods that are installed on that cluster. And I'm just quickly going to point out, we're about to install a new workload that uses an RDS database as its data store. And it's going to be a dependency of this workload that gets deployed for us. And I just wanted to point out that we don't have any RDS instances right now. And Cleat.net is a Route 53 hosted zone that I have that we use for testing and demos. And we don't have anything except the startup authority and the name server records in that hosted zone at the moment. But we're going to leverage external DNS to update Route 53 for us as a part of this workload deployment. All right, so if I come back here, so there are a couple things that we get loaded into the Threeport API out of the gate, and we can query those using TPT-Cuttle. And the first one I wanted to point out to kind of connect the dots a little bit here, I mentioned that it used that TPT-Cuttle used my local AWS configuring credentials to install that Threeport control plane on AWS. And what it does then is it loads those credentials into an AWS account object and calls it default account, sets it to default. You can see my account ID here, and it securely contains the credentials so that the controllers in the control plane can use those to spin up more resources. You can create as many AWS accounts as you like in the system, and that will allow you to create across accounts resources in other accounts, and it uses IAM role assumption to perform that. And that just gives you the ability to manage, different accounts using the same Threeport control plane. And the other thing I'll point out is that we've already got loaded as a consequence of installing the Threeport control plane. We have a Kubernetes runtime instance, and this is just a Kubernetes cluster. And because we installed Threeport on a Kubernetes cluster, we have that cluster available to install workloads in. You can create as many Kubernetes clusters as you like, and you can then install workloads into any of those. But because we've installed Threeport on a cluster, we have it available to us, and it gets set as the default runtime. And you can see our infra provider is EKS. And force delete false just means you cannot delete this Kubernetes cluster until you've removed all workloads from it, just as a safety mechanism. So before you delete the cluster, you have to delete all the workload instances running there. And so the last step is to actually create the workload. And you can actually see on the left here the configuration for the workload that we'll create. And you can see, like, first of all, we give it an arbitrary name, and this is just a simple WordPress demo application. And this references a manifest for the Kubernetes resources for a WordPress app. And it doesn't include a database because we're going to use RDS, but it includes the deployment for WordPress and the config maps and so on. In the near future, we'll begin building workload abstractions for things like, imagine web application abstraction, whereby the developer can give us a high-level config, and we'll actually construct a best practices Kubernetes manifest on the back end and deliver those for them. But this workload primitive will always exist. If there's no abstraction that fits someone's deployment pattern, they'll always be free to define their Kubernetes manifest in whatever way they see fit. So we've got the Kubernetes runtime instance commented out here because, again, we're using the default runtime, so we don't need to specify that. And then we have 3 dependencies. And this is the important part about Threeport, is the dependency management for the workload. The first dependency is an AWS relational database, and that translates to an RDS instance in AWS. And we've just specced out what we want, just a small test database, essentially. The last field is important because that references a WordPress DB-con that is referenced in that WordPress manifest. And that's important because when we spin up the RDS instance, we generate credentials. And once the RDS instance is up, we have to get the host name or the endpoint for that database. And then we provide it to the WordPress app via a secret. So we create that secret and expose those connection details to the application for it so it can run. The next dependency declaration here is for a domain name. I've just called out the essentially the hosted zone that I want to use. And then the gateway says, I want traffic from the public internet to my application. I want to accept traffic on port 443, and I want you to terminate TLS for us. And we want to use a subdomain called test. So that means that we'll get a Route 53 record that is test.cleat.net, and we'll be able to hit this application from the public internet. So at this point, all I need to do is create a workload and then reference that config file that we just looked at, which is WordPress demo workload. So now it's being created. I'll jump back over here to our cluster, and you can see that our WordPress app has already been spun up. That means our workload controller created the resources for WordPress in the cluster, and our gateway controller created some new workloads that result in Cert Manager being provisioned. So the important thing to call out here is we don't have to pre-provision all the support services on the cluster ahead of time, which is pretty traditional for teams and organizations managing Kubernetes. Our control plane installs these support services in response to requirements for an application. For example, if I deployed just a simple batch workload that didn't have dependencies on, ingress and TLS termination, there'd be nothing to get installed. And so we've also now got external DNS to manage our DNS records, and Glue Edge to manage the ingress layer, to route incoming requests to our application. So not only are those support services being installed, they're also being configured for our getting started WordPress application. So the one thing that I'll point out here is that WordPress very shortly will hit a config error because it doesn't have the secret that it needs in order to connect to the database. And furthermore, the database itself doesn't exist yet. If we jump over here to AWS, we can see that our control plane has created the database for it, but it'll take a few minutes to finish the creation of that DB. Once that DB is up, the secret with the connection credentials will be exposed to the application, and this WordPress application will come to life. And here's that config error that is a result of just not having a secret that it expects to be there, which will come a little bit later. And if external DNS has had enough time to reconcile the DNS name, and you can actually see this is actually pretty convenient because you can see the challenge that is being passed, that Let's Encrypt is using to verify that we actually own the domain name. So that challenge is being executed right now. And external DNS is a wonderful tool. It really helps with the management of DNS records. It's really wonderful. It integrates nicely with a lot of ingress layers. And if we refresh this again very shortly, that challenge will complete and we'll get our actual records come up. And we can actually watch the logs on external DNS to see this happen. And it won't take too long. At any rate, we don't have to wait for this. This will all come up in a moment, and I'll come back to this. For the moment, while that database is being created, it'll still take a few more minutes for that DB to come up. I'll jump back over to my slides once I get this chat out of the way. And we can go through some of the other slides here, and then I'll circle back to that demo and we'll see the end result in just a few minutes. All right, so our roadmap. So Our roadmap is currently limited to what we feel we can accomplish in the next 2 or 3 months. We're still a small team and a young project, but most importantly, observability is currently the gaping hole in Threeport. And so we'll be implementing metrics collection with Prometheus, log aggregation with FluentBit, Grafana for visibility, and these will be enabled by default. And like those other support services, they'll be spun up whenever an application needs it. And then the developer or whoever's managing the application will just get their metrics and logs made available to them by default. They don't have to even configure anything. Because the important part here is that Threeport has all of the information it needs to connect all these pieces together. And that's super critical because when people are handcrafting manifests or even using Helm, they have to plumb most of that stuff together themselves. And the other item that's on our immediate roadmap is our SDK, our software development kit. So we've built out much of this functionality here in a tool that we currently call Threeport CodeGen. And this is, you can actually see this in our GitHub repo if you visit it. And we currently use this to generate a bunch of boilerplate and scaffolding for our controllers and API and other components in the code base. And we've also used this to build our first extension to Threeport. And we use this at Cleat as our internal SaaS platform to deliver managed control planes to our customers. So we don't actually have any customers yet. We're still really early. We have design partners that are onboarded. But long story short, we use the SDK to extend Threeport to add features for that platform. And so this SDK can be used, once it's released, will be used to build things like support for other cloud providers that we don't currently support, like GCP and Azure. And for abstractions for common application deployment patterns. And I mentioned those workload abstractions. And this is where we can take really commonly used deployment patterns, provide abstractions for that, so that we can compose the Kubernetes manifests according to the requirements of the application or of the user. And then also we can use the SDK for integrations into any other managed service provider, essentially. So we plan to build some of these extensions with the SDK ourselves, but most importantly, we're offering this as a mechanism for the community to build extensions that serve their specific needs. All right, and go ahead.
Question. Yeah, I just have a question. Like, so you're generating providers, I guess, for the various clouds. Have you, like, I guess Terraform and Crossplane both also do that? Like, but you're doing it fresh? Why not use Crossplane, I guess?
Yeah, and actually Crossplane is one of the comparisons that we have in here. And it's funny you mentioned Crossplane because the early POC, when I was building support for AWS, I actually did a POC with Crossplane. What we ended up doing is writing our own library to do those things. Mostly because we wanted the ultimate in flexibility. Our library just uses the AWS SDK, and that provided us with the freedom and confidence that we wouldn't run into any limitations. I wouldn't worry about limitations necessarily with Terraform, but with Crossplane. And there's a very good reason why we don't use Terraform. But I'll get into that a little bit later. I think I'll probably answer that in one of these later slides, but we can dig into that topic a little more as needed as well.
Does it end up being like, are you projecting out the same set of attributes pretty much as Crossplane? That would be nice. I think you are. I mean, the ones that SDK makes available for an RDS database instance, the same way as Crossplane puts them out there, you're putting them out there.
Yeah, and like full disclosure, our library builds these resources for us using the AWS SDK. For extensibility purposes, we're going to need to support other mechanisms so that users can define specialized infrastructure in their own ways. And that's probably going to be some combination of something like Bicep or Terraform or Crossplane, and just support those mechanisms for custom integrations. For really common use cases, I think our library will work great. But there are always edge cases where someone needs to configure a parameter that we don't expose. So we need to be able to offer that, that opportunity. But at the end of the day, the SDK is also available for someone to build an extension that does it in whichever way they choose. And that's really important to remember, because no one is ever locked into the features that we expose, is the important part. So for project community and governance, we have a roadmap and a contributing guide, a code of conduct and a maintainers list. We have a public Discord chat available for people to hit us up and ask questions. I have an open PR for project scope, just so that everyone's on the same page for what we are and what we are not building. And hopefully in the near future, we'll have regular community working group calls and flesh out our governance model. We only just released the source code for Threeport, so we don't have a pressing need for this right now, but hopefully we do in the very near future. But we have our eye on these to-do items, and we'll tackle them soon. And next, okay, so project comparisons. Radius is the one I'll start with. And this was recently released by a team at Microsoft, and Radius has, and I've spoken to the folks that are building Radius as well, and they share our vision for enabling developers to deliver their applications along with their dependencies in a coherent manner. And Radius, their focus seems to be primarily on facilitating the cloud provider managed service dependencies, which is honestly one of our biggest challenges, like just like what we talked about. It's one of our biggest challenges because there's a lot of ground to cover there, and multiple cloud providers to support. And Radius already has support for Azure and AWS, whereas we're solely AWS at the moment, and the number of managed services we support is much less than Radius. And so where Radius differs from Threeport is that Radius is an extension of Kubernetes. It's a set of Kubernetes controllers that run on Kubernetes. And cluster management is out of scope for Radius, as best I can tell. So you need some other system to manage clusters and install Radius. And then they also don't seem to have any systems to manage those support services, those dependencies that are installed on Kubernetes. So in a nutshell, like Radius is further ahead of us in cloud provider managed service dependency support, but they don't support the cluster runtime dependencies or the support services. All right, and the next one is Crossplane. So we have a lot in common with Radius with our approaches, but in our fundamental approach, we don't have much in common with Crossplane. So Crossplane is a tool for building custom application platforms, as is Threeport. But Crossplane is promoted as a way to build an application platform without having to write any code. And they use custom Kubernetes resources to construct composites that define the behavior of the platform. And in contrast, we maintain that general purpose programming languages are the right choice for defining the behavior in an app platform. So simple behavior is feasible to implement using YAML, like clearly it works, but complex use cases and involved requirements become very challenging to implement. So personally, my argument is that like Turing complete languages like Go are designed specifically to build logical constructs for the behavior in a system. And it's far more powerful and flexible than YAML-defined compositions. And furthermore, in the long run, it's more stable and reliable because you can leverage unit tests and end-to-end testing and just the way you can with any software, I guess. But having said that, it's really important to call out that there are always trade-offs, right? And those trade-offs are largely in the overhead of writing software to accomplish the task of building an application platform, which is non-trivial, to say the least, right? And that's why we're investing so heavily in our SDK, so as to dramatically lower that overhead and provide a way for platform engineers to rapidly implement their software delivery logic and iterate on it, while being able to still leverage the existing primitives and controllers that already exist in Threeport. And then Argo CD. Argo CD is probably the state of the art in software delivery and cloud native systems today. And Threeport also, is involved in software delivery, of course. So they're comparable in that respect. But Argo CD takes the traditional GitOps approach, and whereas Threeport is taking a different approach altogether. The challenge in my experience is when you're using GitOps systems like Argo, and Argo is probably the best example of a GitOps system that I've used. But the challenge comes in when you're managing thousands of lines of Helm templates, and then often applying customized overlays onto those rendered manifests, and then wrangling the Argo C custom resources, and sometimes also in parallel managing Terraform configs or something similar to deploy and manage the managed services, the infrastructure services that are a part of an application stack. Wrangling all of those things together is pretty challenging, and I would argue it adds significantly to our complexity budgets at the end of the day. So we've taken a different approach in two primary ways. We don't leverage CLI tools in a pipeline. That's a fundamental decision we made. We use software controllers that are together a part of a coherent control plane to manage those concerns. So that means that users don't have to find a way to transfer overlapping concerns between like Terraform and Helm, for example. And it's because those values are passed around programmatically through either function calls or through the API in the control plane. Thank you for the time check, Karina. I'll wrap it up real quick. The other primary way we take a different approach is that system config with Threeport is stored in the database in CockroachDB and is accessed by the controllers rather than being pulled from a Git repo. And that allows our controllers to more efficiently read and write those configs in a dynamic environment. So I'll jump back over here to the terminal real quick. We'll just take note that our Getting Started WordPress application is up. Make sure our DNS records have been created, and my session has expired, so I'm going to trust that it's there and just make sure we can hit it. So I'm going to use https test.cleat.net. And because we use the staging environment for Let's Encrypt, this isn't a publicly trusted cert as it would be in production. So I just have to tell my browser to trust it, and here's our app. And I won't demo this because I want to leave a little time for questions, but when you delete the workload, it also deletes all of its dependencies so that the RDS database will be torn down, the DNS records will be removed, and so on and so forth, because there's all of these dependencies are connected in our database so we can clean them up efficiently. But with that, I'll stop. Well, one last quick thing. If you want to find out more, you can go to threeport.io, and we have links to our docs and GitHub and Discord. So, but I'll stop there. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Richard. That was a fantastic presentation and demo. I do have a question, but I wanted to make sure, Dave, was your question sufficiently answered? If you're still here.
Well, I did notice it in the chat. I apologize.
You can't unmute. Okay, no worries.
I'll read the question real quick. It says, is there some reason that service brokers and a standard API are not being used to interface with resources outside or on Kubernetes clusters? It's a pity you can't unmute, David. So Threeport is the standard API that we're introducing to handle all of those concerns coherently, is what we're attempting to do and what we're offering to the community as a way to do that. And the standard APIs that are on the back end are the AWS API, the Kubernetes APIs that we interface with on behalf of the users. I hope that answers your question, but I don't think it does.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying, you're creating a whole new API layer. So
yes, yeah, it's an abstraction layer that is there to manage dependencies, because Kubernetes is a wonderful data center abstraction, and it manages containers in a super effective way. We're managing the dependencies, all of the dependencies from the cluster up to the managed services and the support services. And we just leverage the Kubernetes API and the cloud provider APIs to bring that together in a coherent way. And I hope people like it, because I'm really excited about it.
So with 1 minute, I'll ask my question really fast and then hopefully have time for you, Vendi. Do you provide a mechanism to pull out Cockroach and use etcd instead?
Not today. Not today, no. In fact, I would say that would be very challenging, because the expectation of all our control plane components is that they can make relational database queries. And we've actually found a great deal of value in being able to execute transactions and get large amounts of information into and out of the database. And I love etcd, but spanning it outside of a region is a little treacherous. And Cockroach DB we settled on because the relational database was important to us, and being able to, survive regional outages is also important to us. So switching out databases is not possible today, except that you can switch Postgres out for Cockroach DB if you like. We actually began development with Postgres and migrated to Cockroach.
That's really good to know. And to Alois's point, are you in the Tag App Delivery Slack channel? If we can have a follow-up conversation there, since we are at time for others to ask questions.
And that is in the CNCF organization?
Yes, it's in the CNCF.
Yeah.
Well, we'll send you a link to it. That might be the easiest place to have a follow-up conversation.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. I have the CNCF Slack. I'll just need to find that channel. And that's the Tag App Delivery channel.
We'll post
Absolutely.
it into
Posted a link in
the
chat
issue.
if you want.
Oh,
Yeah,
And
here's
GitHub?
that.
Yeah, perfect. That'd be wonderful. Thanks again for your time, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to tell you all about it.
It is fantastic. Thank you. All
Yeah,
right.
you bet.
Well, with that, we are at time. So we'll have follow-up discussions and then see everybody January 10th.
Wonderful. Bye,
Yeah,
everybody.
happy holidays.
Happy
Happy New
holidays.
Year.
Happy
Thank you,
holidays.
Karina. Happy holidays, everyone.